Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, which will look at how social landlords can become leaner, more efficient organisations in order to improve delivery. I'm Martin Hilditch, Deputy Editor of Inside Housing magazine, and the aim for today's session, organised with Hitachi Solutions, is to provide some top tips for landlords looking to improve their performance or new ideas to help develop their approach. I'll be introducing our brilliant panellists and talking through the various technical ins and outs in a few moments' time. But first, some context. We're speaking, of course, in a rapidly changing environment. This month sees both the autumn statement and the publication of the Housing White Paper, or it should do, that should give us a much firmer idea of Theresa May's approach to the affordable housing sector. Early indications are that she's got a warmer view than her predecessor, but the key tests are yet to come. And in England, one of those tests may also be a new social housing regulator. Certainly the sector has embraced change in recent years. Social landlords have been changing shape, developing and expanding commercial sides of their business in order to cross-subsidise affordable housing. From mergers to partnership working, they've been looking for solutions to make sure they're fit to thrive moving into the future. But all of this has thrown up some questions for management. Judging from the conversations I've been having in recent years, in many areas, data quality in the sector is not great, which makes it much trickier to drive efficiency and make properly informed decisions, or even to attract merger partners. So how do landlords make sure their working practices don't derail wider strategies to deliver efficiencies? What solutions can they deploy? We've assembled an expert panel with a range of experience and perspectives today to help answer some of those questions. First up, we've got John Kiley, Director of Housing and Public Sector with Savills, who will be providing some context and giving some top tips. Then we've got John Hudson, Chief Finance Officer with Home Group, who will be talking through their approach, including some of their detailed stock condition work. And we'll be hearing from Donna Powell, Social Housing Industry Director with Hitachi Solutions, to talk about why this is an important agenda and offering oversight on some potential approaches. Before we kick off, a few words about how the webinar will work. So if you're listening in, we ask you to keep questions coming throughout the presentations using the questions box on the right-hand side. Ask as many questions as you want, and panellists, while they're not presenting, we'd ask panellists to be jumping in, answering some of those questions in the question box. And then after the presentations, I'll be chairing a question and answer session where we'll run through some of those big issues and get the answers to people's queries as well. So there's a variety of different ways that we can interact, but for everybody to get the most out of it, if you can ask questions as we're going, and we'll make sure the panellists are picking up on them. Right, so I think that's the main technical side. So without further ado, we've got John Kiley, Director of Housing and Public Sector with Savills. John, it's over to you.
Thank you, Martin. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. It seems strange doing a presentation, not being able to see you. What I'm going to talk about today is the efficiency savings in asset management, and obviously the biggest line of expenditure for most landlords is repair and maintenance of the existing stock. And clearly, for most of our clients, that has been the target for efficiencies. So three areas I'm going to go on to talk about: strategic approach and standards, looking then at operational efficiencies and delivery effectiveness. So looking at the standards, one of the key things that we clearly need to focus on to start with is the budget, and what can you afford as landlords. Is your budget clear? And that sounds a very simple statement, but based on our experience over the last 12 months, I think it's far from clear for lots of organisations due to all the changes that have been happening. And it's quite important, clearly, that we understand what the financial position is that we're aiming for. When do you know what you need to spend? Clearly, one of the key things we need to break this down into is what's essential, what's required, what's desirable, and what is discretionary. And there's a lot of modelling that can be done around each of those, basically starting from a bare minimum position through to an aspirational position. Looking at standards generally, we've listed on the screen a number of the key issues. Life cycles, everybody is familiar with the issue of life cycles. A lot of people have always linked these back to the Decent Homes Standard, but at the moment, the idea of linking everything back to Decent Homes Standard is not necessarily the only way to take this forward. Our view is that decent homes is still a key driver for a number of organisations, but it's not the only driver anymore. It set a minimum standard, but the majority of organisations actually operate at a Decent Homes Plus standard, and therefore one of the key things we need to think about now is what is that plus element. Moving on to look at unit rates, there are massive differences between unit rates across the sector, and one of the key factors to consider is whether the unit rates that you have in your business plans and in your stock condition databases are actually the same as outturn rates in your organisation, and whether those rates themselves represent value for money. Looking at the specification, clearly that links into your outturn rates in many respects, and lots of organisations are trying to establish now whether they can or should continue with the specifications that they've been employing over the last 12 or 13 years or so. One of the other things that a number of organisations are looking at, and we've been looking at this as well, is a just-in-time approach, or even basically replacement on failure rather than having planned programs of work. So a change in the approach to planning works is another element of standards. The other issue is having varying standards for short, medium and long term, and in many respects this should link back to your sustainability assessment of your stock, and the APE model, or the asset performance evaluation work that Savills undertake, and I know a lot of organisations do themselves, is looking at the need to spend money and when you need to spend that money, and identifying differences between short and medium and long term is one of the key considerations on that. Other areas of standards, clearly, key one that everybody needs to focus on is compliance. That has to be priority number one. Decent homes we've spoken about. Is it as relevant today as it was 10 years ago? In many cases, it is still relevant. We still have to report on your decent homes position to the HCA, but there are other factors that come into play. Serious detriment under the HCA, we don't want to fall foul of the HCA there, and therefore making sure that you are dealing with all your essential landlord obligations. One of the key areas that has increased over the last 10 years or so has been the level of service provided in repairs and maintenance. The sector has tended to increase this level of service, and we know of clients offering emergency repairs at very short intervals, 1 hour and 2 hours. Is that service sustainable in the longer term? Is it necessary? Can you afford it? And is it a service that you can obtain in the private sector? Well, the answer to that is no. And looking at the various levels of service that are operated is another way of improving on efficiencies. One of the other key factors is market competition. How do your properties compare in the marketplace to other social landlords, and more importantly to the expanding private sector landlords? Private landlords tend to adopt a different approach to social landlords when it comes to letting properties, and clearly some lessons can be learned there. Not forgetting amongst all of this, obligations as leaseholders. You as landlords, whether you are the majority leaseholder in the building or not, you still tend to have your leasehold obligations which you cannot ignore. The opportunities then for most social landlords now to create a new set of standards is absolutely paramount, and clearly the starting position has to be meeting statutory requirements, but the whole idea of creating a set of flexible standards reflecting short and medium and longer term aims are absolutely fundamental here. The key thing is to keep stock lettable. A lot of social landlords have identified hard to let stock. When they do their asset performance evaluation modelling of that, the stock in itself may well have a long-term future, but it is more challenging to let, and therefore there's opportunities here to have flexible standards. We don't see any difficulties with that. The biggest difficulty is actually operationally engaging in different standards. So we're looking at trying to adopt a more strategic approach, which at the end of the day ought to enable you to create a more holistic approach towards achieving efficiencies. Moving on from standards to look at the operational side of your ability to make savings. One of the key things that you need to have are good, robust IT and data systems. The idea of trying to create efficiencies without knowing fully what your obligations are, both in terms of financial obligations and in terms of when you need to deliver work programs, is flawed, and therefore you need to have good, accurate, up-to-date information. And asset intelligence is the key to making informed decisions here. Ignorance is actually not bliss in this situation, and we find ourselves in discussions with numerous social landlords who are basing informed decisions on very outdated stock information, which makes those decisions far more difficult. Looking at how you operationally deliver the works, combination of in-house and outsourcing of the operational side of things is fundamental. What's most important, though, is that it is at the right size. So if it's internal delivery, your teams are structured to deliver what you need to over the next 5 years or so. And one of the factors here is the use of in-house contractors becoming far more popular, and certainly one way of achieving good efficiencies with VAT savings, etc. But one of the real challenges that we find here is actually ensuring that that organisation is the right size for the business over the short term and the medium term, and that involves a lot more strategic thinking. Looking at developing appropriate procedures and working practices, one of the key things that I think the sector can improve upon is rigorous contract and project management to ensure that costs are tightly controlled, and also that timescales in the planning phase are right, enabling there to be sufficient time for delivering the programs so that you're not actually trying to cram works into the last few months of the year. Looking at the delivery side of things, clearly investing in the right stock is a paramount there. But planning for an efficient delivery, we firmly believe that you need to actually have a 5-year plan in place to enable you to become more efficient in the way you deliver your works programs. Selecting a right procurement strategy, there's been lots of pressure in the past on having partnering type contracts, but looking at whether you have longer term contracts, short term contracts, whether they're partnering or traditional or even joint ventures, all of these options enable you to look at things differently. Developing realistic pricing models, we have worked with a number of organisations, and apportionment of risk on a contractor which is disproportionate to the value of the work to the contractor is going to just create a higher pricing model. So one of the most efficient ways of ensuring that you get value for money is actually to make sure that the way you're setting your contracts up works for both the contractor and yourselves. Where you have existing contracts, benchmarking those prices against current outturns is fundamental. And looking at value engineering never goes away. The idea of value engineering, the use of procurement consortia is one of the key things as well. They operate better in some parts of the country than others, but we have felt that the idea now of individual landlords being able to obtain massive volumes and procurement efficiencies has diminished as the type of work has changed over time, and potentially that offers opportunities for procurement consortia to help you generate better value. Amongst all of this, though, there's the need to keep challenging what you're doing, keep challenging what your contractors are doing and how you operate, because the only way I think of actually ensuring that you're on the game in making efficiencies is to keep your eyes and ears open and challenge what's happening. So to basically summarize, creating efficiency savings, I think, is best achieved through a more holistic approach. Many of the individual points that I've mentioned today in themselves will help you to make some savings, but having a more joined up holistic approach, I think, is going to enable you to make a far greater impact across your business over the next 5 years and release some additional funds to go to that all-important new development program. So thank you very much, everybody, and look forward to receiving your questions.
Thank you very much. And I think we've got a question up already, prompted by the presentation. So take a look at that. Right. Thanks, John. And now we've got John Hudson, Chief Financial Officer with Home Group. So, John, welcome and over to you.
Okay. So many thanks and good afternoon, everybody. Just to cause a bit of confusion, it is another John. So just to remind, my name is John Hudson. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Home Group. I wanted to spend some time today just trying to focus on some real-world, some real-life examples of projects which we've either recently undertaken or are right in the middle of, and they're all delivering very significant value for money for us. Okay, so moving on, just checking, Martin and the guys, just moving on in terms of that slide pack. So in terms of our approach to value for money, that is very much based around the 3 E's, and this is the only bit of theory which I'm really going to share in this presentation. But we very much think about the 3 E's, which are economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. Why do we do that? Because that encourages a very balanced view. It's not just how much we spend and where we can make cost savings, but it's also very much about the outcomes that we achieve and the means by which those are delivered. So at Home Group, like everywhere else in the sector, we are required to and have targeted some very ambitious cost savings, but the majority of these will be delivered through smarter working. So starting off at the top of the slide, in economic terms, we have and greatly value our investment in our in-house procurement team. Recent system changes that we are pushing through are based around getting 100% of our spend through that team. So if we look back in time for Home Group, we used to have a good chunk of our procurement would go through those specialists, but maybe only about half, if we were honest, and much of the remainder of the spend would be out with local budget holders, which was not really efficient. So now we're very much moving to pushing 100% of our spend through that central procurement team, which not only ensures that we get maximum purchasing leverage, but crucially and often forgotten, particularly by the operational side of the business, is that the legal terms and conditions that attach to purchases are understood and present an acceptable risk to Home Group. How we go about things has also been the subject of very much discussion recently. We're currently implementing a brand new ERP system. I'll come on to that in a moment. And we've begun to focus on processes from beginning to end, regardless of how many different departments that process ultimately passes through. We're very much trying to think about the process first and then work out who the best person to do it is without becoming fixated on functional silos. We're also reviewing our KPIs to ensure we've identified the right measures that tell us if we're achieving our objectives and if the levers that we pull are the most effective. So we're not saying that we've reached our target state in all of these areas. Who amongst us could say that? But we do use this framework to establish what we could do to inform our future plans. If it works for you, then great. It may be that you've all got your alternative preferred model, but I would highlight the value of trying to break down your value for money approach into some very digestible chunks. Okay, so I'm going to move on to next slide now in terms of stock condition survey. Stock condition survey was touched on by John, and to follow on from John, to pick up one of his quotes, ignorance is not bliss, ignorance is expensive. Now, we've undertaken a pretty major exercise in the last 2 years, and that's how long it took, to look at all of the data that we hold around our properties and how that informs the future planned maintenance and capital works that we do. Now, this was a big exercise, so I'm not expecting that other people have done this. You have to be quite brave to take the breath to actually embark upon this journey. As I say, it took a long time, a lot of money, wasn't expensive, and we're talking into 7 figures here in terms of the cost. But the scope of the project was to visit all of our general needs properties. And crucially, the objective was to visit 100%. And that's in stark contrast to what was the previous common practice, which we think in the sector was to visit around 20% of stock. Now, have we got there? More or less. It'd be wrong not to say there are some properties that we haven't visited, which have been hard to access. But we're certainly not going to give up on those. But we have visited circa 90% plus of all of our properties with the objective to complete that up to 100%. Why is that good? Because it gives us the information to be able to work out what we need to spend our money on. And when we have visited those properties, data has absolutely been king. We've looked at around 900 individual components, whereas previous surveys only captured around 150. That's given us some very granular, comprehensive detail about our properties, the condition, the install date, the construction material, the build date, the room size, the SAP information. I mean, we really have invested a lot in information. Why is that important? Well, it means that we've been able to more accurately program our maintenance works. We have a clearer picture of current condition and the likely lifespan of each component. What does it mean, though, in terms of pound notes? Compared to our original business plan, before we did this exercise, having now got the data, we've identified savings against our original business plan of £55 million over the next 5 years, from revision to those expected component life cycles. Broadly, what did the data tell us? It told us that generally our stock was in better condition than we previously thought. That, to me, makes very much logical sense, because you're more likely in the world of trying to grapple with lots of information and data to maybe not update a system, or in particular, if you inherit stock from somebody else, to not get a full information set. So generally, I think in the sector, if we're unsure about the condition of something, the property gets swept up into a very global or regional wide replacement program, and you end up replacing things maybe before they were due. That certainly is a key finding of our stock survey, and being very honest about that, but we have therefore been able to identify a huge amount of savings over a 5-year business plan, and they have been a very important plank to our response to the recent emergency budget measures levied on the sector by government. We've identified much more accurately things such as shared elements like communal spaces and roofs of blocks, and we have that certainty over that level of future maintenance, which is just leading to better decisions when considering plans for individual assets or estates. So that data again can be used for many purposes, not just for planned maintenance, but also when you look at a 10, 20, 30-year life cycle of a particular scheme or estate, informs all kinds of things, even leading up to regeneration or keep or sell decisions. Of course, the most important thing in terms of data is that you must keep it up to date. Now that we've gone through the very much big mountain, what the exercise represented, is you must therefore keep your data clean. We are not proposing to do a 100% stock survey every 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. Our intention now is, now we have clean data, is to every year maybe do 5 or 10% of our stock, just to make sure that data is correct. If we do find deviations between what we discover and our system data, of course we'll then increase that sample size to make sure we get back on track. So stock condition survey, I cannot underline how important that was to have good information. Moving on to next slide, which is another real project which we have done within Home Group and are currently implementing. We are introducing an ERP system. For those who don't know what ERP stands for, it's Enterprise Resource Planning, which basically it's just one IS system which can just try and integrate, talk to each other, and do many things that you'd expect that IS systems in the current world should do. So we're implementing this ERP system, which will replace over 80 separate applications across the organization. Our approach is to target both internal and external benefits. So if I touch upon what some of those look like, internally, using our new ERP system, we want budget holders to be able to self-serve the financial information they need. Now, I've got a vested interest in this, obviously with my finance background, but having the finance department create an actuals versus budget report, often in Excel, and then drilling down to understand variances seems not the smartest way to us. So we ask the question, why can't budget holders access a system themselves to get their required reports and have a drill down capability to investigate? The role of the finance team should then be to ensure the integrity of the base data and to help with analysis, not the collection of statistics. That's what systems do. Externally, currently we update supplier details ourselves when we talk to those third parties. Again, the question, why can't the supplier do that themselves? The motivation is there for them to do it, so their payments can be processed quickly and efficiently. So why not involve them or require them even in that process? Make them accountable for maintenance and efficient update of their data. And that data entry point is so important. So how many people on this call now recognize the example where the same information has to be input multiple times? Not only is that duplicated effort, but how often have you seen time wasted in reconciling two different versions of the truth? One particular pet hate for me in my career is how often have you heard the phrase, well, I've got a different number, in a meeting, and following that, things fall apart as everybody takes a break while the two protagonists are tasked with agreeing whose number is right. One version of the truth is so important to have an effective and efficient organization. And that point about analysis versus statistics, it's a common accusation levied against many finance and IS departments. Thanks for the numbers, but what do they mean? The development of proper business intelligence dashboards is something we're currently heavily involved in and a key output of our new ERP system being developed. So stock condition survey and ERP, they are two massive projects which we have either just recently completed or completing now. Moving on though to something else which I wanted to raise on this webinar, which is talking about benchmarking. So moving on to the next slide, in terms of benchmarking, like several in the sector, we've recently increased our focus on benchmarking, and that's involved an investment. So we've employed some people to do this, and we see that though exactly as what I said, it's an investment. Taking time to understand information and set challenging targets will pay off in the long run. Previously, benchmarking was, I think, seen mainly as a compliance exercise, with the majority of time spent collecting large amounts of data and the only output being maybe a ranking against other providers. And quite often that resulted in what I would call data denial. So no understanding of the results. So excuses of either the data must be wrong or but we're different were often trotted out. But we think it's better investing, and who wouldn't, more time in interrogating the data to better understand our relative performance. That allows us to identify areas which aren't comparable because we really are different. And those areas where actually we're not different, we're underperforming. Benchmarking helps us to understand what could be achievable. And one particular example might be setting stretch targets. So again, within your business plans or financial forecasts or even operational forecasts, you might set yourself a target. It's often budget. How do you know if that target is actually good or bad when compared to others? So it is very important to set yourself a target which is mindful and knows what the external sector delivers, and how do you compare against that? It could very much be seen as burying your head in the sand if you just keep setting budget numbers which are not challenging, which you achieve, and at the end of the year you pat yourself on the back and you tell yourself that you made budget, so therefore good for you. So you need to decide what ideal performance looks like, and also bear in mind that challenge that sometimes you might not want to be top quartile in all areas. There could be a balance to strike between cost and performance. If you look at things such as your maintenance cost per unit that you spend, should that be a high number or a low number? It probably has to be considered in hand with the CapEx works or the capital works that you do. So if you're putting doors into a property, which are pretty low cost, you'd probably expect to be replacing and repairing them on quite a frequent basis. If you invest more maybe in quality assets, you might find that your capital investment might be higher, but your repairs and maintenance might be lower. Clearly, again, on some financial metrics, things like gearing, a common conversation we have with internally and with others in the sector is, what is a good number for gearing? So if you look at your balance sheet compared to somebody else's, and you look at how much debt you've raised compared to your balance sheet value, that classic gearing ratio quoted by your finance team, is it good to be high? because if you're too high, that sounds too risky. But is it good to be low? Because if it's too low, it sounds like you're not taking enough risk. But the important thing is you must inform yourself by what your peer groups have as comparable information. So going forward, we are working on developing greater insight around best practice to help us drive continuous improvement. One call out I would give to those on this call and in the sector is, how can we work together to share information? It wouldn't seem right to me that in the sector where we have 1,700 housing associations, that each of them are working in isolation on what good KPIs are or what their data is. I think there is much to be gained from that sharing of information. Certainly in terms of home group, we are involved and co-chair with DLCG and Efficiency Working Group, and that is looking at developing a set of KPIs which can be consistently and comparably measured across the sector and benchmarked. And again, I would not underestimate that task of trying to agree a set of KPIs, because you do at some point have to agree what they are. It is a task which, just for a warning of those who do try and get involved in it, it can go on forever and ever. So you have to be brave enough to draw a line under it and say, right, these are the important measures. There shouldn't be too many of them, but need to agree them, and then have dialogue with your peer group as to how are you doing and what does that mean about what your own performance is. So that's about it from me. So again, happy to take any questions either online or as we wrap up at the very end. Key messages, just to summarize, were data has been so important to us, in particular in relation to our stock and all our planned maintenance works. We did find that huge savings could be made on the back of good data. And then just think a bit differently in terms of putting in place good systems. So one overall system, expensive to install, but does pay back. It is an investment, and using data and information and just push those ideas of self-service, how you get systems and maybe others in the organization to do the things which you know should be quite automatic and quite quick. The idea of information is to collect it, but it means nothing unless you get into analysis and think about how your own internal corporate structure actually supports that analysis as opposed to statistics. Okay, so that's it from me. So as I say, happy to take questions later on.
Thank you very much, John. And there are certainly some questions coming through. I noticed one of them is calling you brave, so we'll pick up on that in a bit. Right, next up we've got Donna Powell, Social Housing Industry Director with Hitachi Solutions. Donna, it's over to you.
Thank you. Hi everyone. Just to give you a little bit about my background, I've worked with many housing associations over the years, leading on transformation programs, IT implementations and acquisitions. Over the last couple of years, I've actually worked vendor side as a housing industry lead. During my time, I've come across many common challenges, particularly when it comes to IT solutions. This has led to a passion of mine for helping the housing industry to overcome some of these challenges. I'd like to share some of these with you today. So the first slide you will see here provides a very basic typical housing industry landscape. Within housing there tends to be multiple systems in use. This slide just gives a very high level overview of what the core systems may be used for. I'm sure many of you have experienced the challenge of maintaining so many business applications, including multiple departmental spreadsheets. The next slide highlights some of the challenges I have identified from such a landscape. So, multiple systems can result in multiple data sets. This proves to be very time-consuming to maintain and costly. It also provides uncertainty over which dataset is the single version of the truth. Some systems may not be accessible to all users. Restricting the information available to users can make it difficult for employees to get a full understanding of the customer and their needs. This may prevent you offering the customer the most suitable service for them the first time round. Where customer services and other teams have limited access to information, they may have no other option than to pass inquiries to specialist services who do have access to the information. This makes the cost of the inquiry more expensive and it may take longer to deal with. Having data across multiple systems may make it difficult for your organisation to adopt mobile working to its full potential, resulting in staff having to make trips back to the office to obtain information or update records. The impact of this can be less visits being made as well as a higher operational cost. Many organisations have a degree of self-serve, allowing customers to request services. However, there is a further potential to reduce the number of face-to-face, telephone and email contacts by extending the self-serve offer to a full My Account type portal. This allows customers to serve themselves any time of the day. Having so many applications in use results in high support and maintenance costs. Also, the cost of integration between systems can prove expensive. There is also a higher overhead for training users across multiple systems. Some of the long-standing housing applications can prove expensive to change and may have long lead times with the vendor for changes to be applied. This makes it difficult for your business to continually improve the way it works and also adopt the changes required to keep up with the government legislation. These are just some of the challenges I've experienced during my time working within the housing sector. It is a very challenging time for the industry, with budget cuts, high demand on the service and so many government changes being introduced. Now is the time to take the opportunity to use technology in a smarter way to support your business. I believe introducing an ERP solution will improve the customer experience, reduce operational costs, improve debt recovery and allow you to better manage and maintain your properties. So I thought I'd share with you some of the benefits I've identified from implementing ERP solutions. Dynamics ERP provides one data model, reducing the need for maintaining multiple sets of data and providing integration between them. It also improves business efficiency with the introduction of process automation and communication updates. This results in reduced levels of contact, reduced call handling times, improved SLAs and increased arrears recovery. ERP provides a 360-degree view of the customer, enabling you to provide the correct service first time. It also allows you to check the eligibility of the service provision to ensure you are only providing services to those eligible. A self-service portal as part of the ERP solution will also reduce the number of calls, emails and face-to-face inquiries, as you will provide the customer with the ability to check their account balance, make payments, raise requests and obtain other information for themselves. ERP provides improved MI as data is contained within the ERP solution rather than spread across multiple systems, allowing you to better understand customer demand and business performance. It offers a flexible landscape with the ability to easily make changes to the solution, helping you keep up with business changes with less reliance on vendors. An ERP solution can reduce the support and maintenance costs as the IT landscape is reduced. It can also reduce training times and costs due to a lower number of applications in use. So I thought I'd share with you some of the benefits achieved by organisations who have implemented an ERP solution. So Essex County Fire and Rescue reduced their team size by enabling mobile working and automating processes. UCAS reduced debt by 40% by making information available throughout the business and simplifying business processes. Compass Point reduced call handling times by 43% and made £2.1 million in savings over the first year. Maxell reduced IT support and maintenance costs by 40%. The Affinity Sutton project is currently underway and making excellent progress. Their aim is to provide a single version of the truth and enable digital channel shift. I've listed some points I believe to be key success factors when implementing ERP solutions. Being conscious of time, I'll lead you to read through these as the slides are circulated. But the one point I'd really like to make is, as much as ERP solutions sound scary, they really do not have to be. Start at a pace that suits you, one that is manageable for your organisation. The beauty of an ERP solution is that you can add to it, reducing your current landscape as you go. So finally, I'd just like to thank you for listening. If you have any questions after the webinar or would like to discuss further, I've included my contact details for you. I'm more than happy to be contacted directly. Thank you once again.
Right, Thank you, Donna, and thank you all. We'll move on to the question and answers now, and there's certainly quite a number that have been coming through, which I'll pick up on as many as possible of. But I'd ask people to keep asking questions, because I'll put them to the panel as we move along. So keep them coming. I think I'll kick off with picking up one of the things that kind of ran through most of the presentations there, and this is I guess the quality of the data that the sector's got at the minute, and I guess a kind of theme of there being a lot of time wasted perhaps with different systems within individual organisations, but also I guess you're talking about the difficulties comparing data between organisations as well, so kind of benchmarking in the sector. And there's a question from James Streppleton, which was well, a couple of questions. One was relating to benchmarking, and the other one asking John Hudson about can you give greater detail of the DCLG efficiency working group? And it'd be quite interesting just to start there, perhaps, John, if that's okay, to find out a little bit more about that group, but also what kind of problems it's encountering, because certainly when we've done pieces of research, a lot of those themes over the years have certainly been very apparent, that it's quite difficult sometimes to compare data. Landlords are doing things in very different ways, and actually even within individual organisations, information is kept in different systems, and it's quite difficult to compare. So, John, can we maybe kick off there? If that's...
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that efficiency working group, it's a group which our chief exec himself actually sits on and is very active in. So we do attach a lot of the importance to it, and as per the response on the webinar chat there, we will get you guys, if that's okay, to circulate details of that working group after this webinar. For us, some of the challenges, I think a bit of it is when you first get together, everybody almost wants to talk about the good stuff, about how they're doing well in certain KPIs and how it presents them as being pretty good performers. And that's absolutely fine, but maybe it's more helpful to just take a more challenging approach and just be honest and say, yeah, but what's our blind spots? I'm sure many people on this webinar will have received data or analysis from Housemark or even from Inside Housing, other trade press, from the regulator themselves, which just takes data and tries to almost impose their version of what the relevant KPIs are. Now I think it's very important, therefore, for the sector through this efficiency working group to get together to say, no, let's have a look at this ourselves, not have these kind of measures imposed upon us because we understand them. And sure, what we find is when we do pull apart things like HCA, regression analysis, or Housemark data, is we do find that many of these KPIs which are circulated are not really on an apples for apples basis. So the best thing and the only way to answer that to us is not to follow the path of kind of, dare I say, moaning about it, saying, well, but we're different. It's to actually go out there and change what the narrative is. So let's all get together, share information, decide on probably a dozen, maybe, really key metrics. And that work's still in progress, so I can't really reveal at this stage. It would be wrong to say what we think the right measures are, but just be involved with the conversation. One thing certainly for myself I find is that networking is okay in some areas of the sector. I have worked in other sectors where networking has been much more prevalent, and I'm quite happy to have a cup of coffee when I'm traveling around the country, whether I'm in Manchester, Leeds, London, wherever, to catch up with another CFO or FD from in the sector, just to have that discussion. And that discussion is the real quality starting point for everything to do with benchmarking.
Thanks very much, John. And as mentioned, other trade press are available, but Inside Housing is clearly the best source of information. That's the single source we're hearing in this webinar. Donna, I wonder whether I can move over to you. We've been talking about, again, James mentioned, should we be benchmarking in our sector, and what other sectors do you benchmark in? And you mentioned in your presentation a number of other sectors and how they've been approaching ERP. So I just wonder whether you can, what crossover is there, and how good is the housing sector at looking beyond its own boundaries, and should it get better at that?
I think there is certainly some merit in housing looking across other sectors. There's a lot to learn from them, and you do share a lot of common challenges. So debt is an obvious one. Hitachi work with a lot of finance companies, some of those that offer these payday loans and things like that, actually perhaps have the same kind of customer profile similar to housing associations. And again, working with some of those to look at how they have actually managed debt recovery and so on, I'm sure could be very useful to the housing sector. So I do believe that actually there is a lot of merit in looking at other sectors with a similar customer profile.
Thanks very much for that, Donna. Sorry for the hesitation there. Yeah, interesting thing to pick up on there. And John Keeley, if I can just hop over to you and move on a little bit. But I mean, you were talking about numerous landlords making decisions based on outdated data. And I guess, to what extent is the sector still playing catch up, and why? Why are some people lagging behind? Because obviously there've been a number of drivers to improve, data quality and efficiency in recent years. So yeah, if you can pick up on that, John, please.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Yes, I think the sector has gone through a lot of change over the last 10 years. If you were an LSVT, then at the time you did your transfer, you would have had quite a lot of information gathered. You'd have had a stock condition survey done, and you've used that information to plan your programs going forward. If you were a traditional RP, you didn't have those sort of pressures, and there was no real obligation or need for you to actually go out and do stock condition surveys. Funders have always had requirements for people to do quinquennial stock condition surveys, so there has been a drive to do surveys. But what we're finding now is that because organisations have done so much work following the Decent Homes programme and eco programs and all sorts of other initiatives that have been out over the last few years, that they've really struggled to keep their databases up to date, and it's been an ongoing task of trying to keep them up to date and use them proactively. And as soon as they become slightly unreliable, and I use that term quite loosely there, once they become unreliable so that you feel that you can't trust the information, then of course no one ever uses it. And what happens then is that people set up their separate data sources, spreadsheets abound all over the place. So you have more than, as Donna kept saying, one version of the truth. As soon as you have more than one version of the truth, you end up in trouble. So that's the challenge that we've found. And like John said earlier, Home Group doing a 100% survey, I do think that has become far more of a common approach these days, and we're certainly involved with a number of organisations in doing very high percentage surveys so that they can actually use that information more intelligently rather than taking a guess.
And John, just to jump in there, do you think that's something that organisations should be doing, that 100%? Because I'll move on to John Hudson in a minute, but to talk about that. But is that an approach you think is kind of cost effective and the sensible thing to be doing?
Clearly, most people that are listening to this would expect me to say yes to that as we actually go out and do the surveys. But I do. Whether it should be 100%, I think it depends upon what you believe the quality of your data is at the moment. And if you've kept your data up to date, and if you go and do some validation surveys, then you might feel that you don't need to do 100%. So I think it's horses for courses, and I do think it depends upon the organisation's own individual aims and aspirations. So John Hudson talked about the savings that have resulted as a result of doing a 100% survey, and I think the investment that you put into that is usually more than made up by the potential savings and the business intelligence that you get from having such a high percentage of stock survey information. The other thing is that in virtually all cases, you have to go and do a survey before you do work in properties anyway, whether they're done internally by the organisation, whether they're done by consultants, or whether they're done by the contractor. You end up having to do a survey at some stage anyway. So having a survey up front from a client's perspective, enabling you to use that information in advance planning, has got to be the sensible way forward.
Great, thanks. And I'll move on to John Hudson next, and a question from Chris Elliott, which kind of picks up on that theme. So talking about the visiting of the properties there, and Chris asked, how did you get the business case agreed to spend 7 figures? And this is where the bravery comes in. He said it's the right but brave decision. So John, would you like to jump in there? And I think, Donna, there's also been a question about business cases, so I'll come to you next and pick up on another one there.
Yeah, I think it's very much about you got to take your board on a journey. So there is an element of bravery, but actually, you know what? Like any exercise where you begin to gather data, and you realise that your data is weak or missing in some areas, as you go through that very evidence-based approach, you just gain the confidence to make those brave decisions. And sometimes, albeit you can spend, we spend 7 figures, a 7-figure sum in terms of the stock condition survey. But if we're spending £100 million per year on repairs and maintenance, then really it's trying to couch that to the board and say, look, have you got the confidence that if we had great data, we could get a 1-year payback if we just had a 1 or 2% improvement in terms of our performance in this area? And they look back and they say, well, surely information, good data will give you probably much more than 1 or 2%, and that exactly is what our experience was. It's probably no different to the same approach that we take in terms of procurement. So and for procurement, we have a belief that if you buy with skill and expertise, therefore invest in a procurement team, they should be able to pay back their salaries many times over. So we see that as an investment. So again, it's looking at the total pool of expenditure that you're looking at, and just thinking, you know what, even a small percentage of a very big number is a big number in itself, and that therefore paves the ground to say to the board, we're a big business, these are big numbers, but there are big savings to be had. And the board journey for us as well was also very important to share with them some of those data weaknesses. So again, encourage everybody, and having been on several boards don't always want to hear good news. If things are working well and things are fantastic, great, but what they really want to know is what's not working, what's keeping you awake at night, what's the risks, where could we be better? So again, it's that little bit of bravery, but hopefully just integrity to say, look, let's be honest, our data is not good, and we need to confess that and talk about it. And that's the journey which Home Group went through. In terms of sharing business cases, therefore, just picking up on the second question, always happy to talk about key numbers in terms of what went into our business case, but it's not just the case itself, because I think in a business case is being a document which gets put on the board table, please approve, yes or no. It's the approach that you take with your board. So if you do this right, at some point they're actually badgering, say, we want to see this business case presented because we want to get on with it. So very much I would say collaborate with your board and be honest, and just provide them with evidence and data, and that smooths the way for that business case to be approved.
And John, I guess you're the living proof that it's certainly possible to convince chief financial officers anyway.
Yes, indeed.
Donna, I'm going to move on to the question that's put to you by Chris also, I think, but similarly themed around business cases. So getting the data into an ERP system can put people off. Should this be part of the business case for change? So again, it's how do you build business cases when it's quite a big piece of work, and how do you go about putting that? So Donna, can you jump in on that?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Chris, for the question. Absolutely, data should be part of your business case. Data becomes a work stream within its own right when you're implementing these solutions. As John has actually mentioned on numerous occasions, getting the quality of your data right is so important. Any system is only as good as the data it holds, so we have to make sure the data is correct. So it's all well and good implementing systems, but we do need that data to be up to date also. So absolutely it should be part of the business case, treating data as a dependency of that implementation, and making sure you put the right investment into it. The key success of an ERP solution, one of the successes is absolutely the data and transitioning that data into your new solution.
Thanks very much. And James Stroppen's just made the point that perhaps as well as sharing KPIs and quoting common standards and benchmarking, we ought to be, as a sector, sharing business cases, standards and structures. So kind of picking up on that theme. I think we're running towards the end of the webinar now, so I'm just going to throw a question at everybody and run along the panel on this. And I guess perhaps looking at, because people quite often, when you're talking about fairly big pieces of work or new ways of working, you talk about kind of barriers to doing that. So I guess, what are the barriers, or what are some of the key barriers for you to working more efficiently and changing the way that the sector works? And how can they overcome? So if you can talk about one or two key things there, I'll move along the panel and then round off. So just do it in order. So John, Kylie, if you can start off, and then I'll move to John and then Donna. So John.
Sure. Yeah, Martin, thanks. I think one of the key barriers that we've really felt is that the sector has embarked on a major journey over the last 10, 15 years. It's developed an awful long way. It's done a lot of good work, and people feel that change is dangerous, change is risky, and therefore it's easier to stay in the comfort zone that we're in than it is to sort of embark on a new journey or another journey. One of the problems in social housing, I think, is there's initiative after initiative running all the time, and therefore people become weary of all of that. And a lot of this involves a bit of transformation in the way people might do things, and that in itself creates some barriers. Some people are up for it and some people aren't, and as has been highlighted, it involves some big decisions being taken, and therefore sometimes it just goes into the hard basket because there's so many other things going on in the sector that are business as normal. It makes it very difficult for people to sort of embrace the whole idea of doing some of the things that we've talked about today.
Thanks very much. And moving on to John Hudson, the key barriers that you've seen raised and how you can overcome them.
Yeah, maybe just the word barriers. I'm just thinking through that. For me, I've been in the sector for about 17 months, so not very long, but I have come from 2 or 3 different sectors in my past, and I do think about to challenge the sector a bit. It is a little bit inward looking, so they do when they look to compare performance, do look around to the rest of the sector. And I think one of the attendees on the webinar asked a great question before about saying, would you look inside or outside of the sector for benchmarking? When you look at what we do, the service we provide, whether we are going through a change management program, whether we're communicating with customers, these things are all done in many other different sectors. And I would just encourage people to look outside and see who does it best, not just in housing, but who does it best anywhere. So a great example, for example, many people, in a future period when we've all got fantastic ERP systems in place, very much a kind of digital first approach. Look at things like banks, banks who get beaten, everybody hates them, but look how easy it is to communicate and how effective and efficient to do business with a bank now. How many people actually walk into a bank and do business over a branch in their kind of high street near to where they live? And there are so many things which are coming our way that technology throws up opportunities. And don't reinvent the wheel. Just look outside and think you yourself where you've had fantastic service, because I bet you most of the services that we offer as a sector, somebody else somewhere really does quite a similar thing. So let's learn from it.
Thanks, John. Great food for thought there. And Donna, if you can round things off. So again, the barriers and how you can overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say that I totally agree with everything John has just said, really. So just to relay his message, I think there's a nervousness within housing about being the first one to do something. They like to look and watch and see what others are doing first and then follow on from their success. And as John said, you know, there's many sectors out there that are doing things differently and have been doing things differently for quite some time. And there's absolutely no reason why housing cannot be doing the same. Quite often I come across a barrier of security. People are very nervous of having online solutions. They worry about the security. But when you think banks and other sectors actually go that way of online solutions, they've managed it, they've made it a success, and I really do think that now is the time for housing to look outside of the industry and look at how some of the other private sector organisations are moving forward to get the efficiencies and improve their business.
Oh, thank you very much, Donna, and a great point to end on. That hours were whisked by incredibly quickly. Hopefully we covered a decent number of people's questions. Thank you all very much to our attendees and to our panel. Thank you very much, and yeah, very enjoyable session. Thanks.